Okay. Recording is good.
Okay, welcome everybody to our community information session for the Sault Ste transmission line refurbishment project. We had some introductions. My name is Jillian Deman. I'm from ACOM, presenting on behalf of Hydro One. Here, the representatives are Sarah Cole, Christina Reynolds, and Jonathan Zagazeta. We also have Jessica Zadori here, the biodiversity coordinator from the Chippewa First Nation, as well as Doug and Gina. So for today's agenda, we're going to go through a project overview. We're going to discuss where we're at in terms of the class environmental assessment process, touch on some highlights from the environmental study report, discuss next steps, and then have a question and answer period at the end. So if anyone has a question here, can ask them at the end. For those who are viewing this as a recording, if you have any questions, you're welcome to email them to Christina or Sarah, and their email addresses are here on the screen.
I can give you a card.
You can also request them from Jessica, and she will forward them to you if you have any questions for them. In terms of the project overview, the Sault Ste circuit is nearing its end of life and has been designated for refurbishment. This is required to ensure the continued reliability and integrity of the transmission lines and electricity supply to residents and businesses within the district. So the refurbishment would include or involve a replacement of aging and damaged wood pole structures, a replacement of the conductor wire, hardware, and insulators along the existing right-of-way, replacement of overhead shield wire, the addition of an optical ground wire fiber, increase in conductor size, so this would allow for potential future capacity, an increase in that. And there's also work within the McKay Transformer Station fence, so there's an expansion of about 5 meters on the east side of that transformer station. So in terms of the project location, the study area is approximately 120 kilometers long, and we've divided it up into 3 sections. So the first section, it starts right in the Sault at the 3rd line transformer station, and it goes from there to the Goulet Bay transformer station. The second section, it goes from the Goulet Bay transformer station to the Batchewana transformer station, and the 3rd section goes from Batchewana to the McKay transformer station. In terms of the project schedule, we started with the notice of commencement back in July 2022. There's an environmental inventory collection with some field work conducted in September. And from then until January, we drafted up the environmental study report and submitted it for public review, a 60-day public review. And now we're in the midst of finalizing that and are anticipating to submit it and release it to MECP later this spring. In the summer, there'll be further permitting and other approvals obtained, and the construction is anticipated for September. With respect to consultation with Indigenous communities, Hydro One recognizes the importance of engagement with Indigenous communities, and they're committed to providing timely project information, meeting with community representatives and hosting project information sessions like this one, engaging with communities to address project-specific concerns, supporting participating in project work such as monitoring opportunities. Hydro One is also committed to supporting Indigenous participation on this project, and the contractor has been directed to provide labor and subcontracting opportunities to Indigenous communities and businesses in the project area. And as a special note, Hydro One will continue to work with communities to address any outstanding project concerns beyond the conclusion of the EA. So with respect to the process, the proposed transmission line refurbishment is subject to the class environmental assessment for minor transmission line facilities, which is an approved planning process under the Ontario Environmental Assessment Act. The Class EA for minor transmission facilities sets out a planning and decision-making process for projects with predictable environmental effects that can be mitigated. So just to go through the process again, in early 2022, the need was identified for this particular line, and the study area was defined. In June, July 2022, the notice of commencement was issued, and from then till winter, the environmental inventory was collected and the draft environmental study report was drafted. And from now until later this spring, we're going to be finalizing that document and submitting it to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So the HONI Class E for minor transmission facilities process requires the identification of feasible alternatives. So there were 3 identified for this project. The first was building a new 115 kilovolt transmission line parallel to the existing line. So establishing an entirely new right-of-way. The second alternative was do nothing. And then the third alternative was to refurbish the existing line. So stay within the existing right-of-way and refurbish the existing poles. So potential quantitative and qualitative effects associated with alternatives 1 and 3 specifically were compared and evaluated on the basis of established criteria to determine a preferred alternative. And the preferred alternative was the refurbishment of the existing line. With respect to environmental inventory, a desktop review of background information and natural environment field surveys were completed in September 2022 in order to establish the baseline environmental conditions, identify potential impacts associated with the project, and develop avoidance and mitigation measures. The areas that were assessed and evaluated were the following: so agriculture, forestry, cultural heritage, land use and communities, mineral resources, natural environment resources, recreational conditions, and visual and aesthetic conditions. I'm going to go through a couple of those. So with respect to agriculture, few areas within the study area are used as agricultural land. It's mostly pasture forage areas with minimal amounts of oat along the Montreal River, and as well as within the city limits of Sault Ste. Marie. With respect to forestry, it's all forest. There's forest everywhere. It's within the Algoma Forest Management Plan and is under a sustainable forest license managed by the Third Forest Management Incorporated. And lands along the existing right-of-way are designated for regular harvest allocation as well as contingency allocation. With respect to cultural heritage, Golder Associates Limited completed a stage 1 and stage 2 archaeological assessment for the Sault Ste. Circuit, with potential to, which has been identified potential to support archaeological resources. In the event that archaeological material is encountered during the construction, all activities with the potential to affect these materials will cease immediately and the licensed archaeologist will be engaged. Work will be planned to avoid adverse effects to identify the potential built heritage resources. And a stage 2 archaeological assessment will be completed for areas still requiring assessment in advance of construction start. With respect to land use and communities, for land use planning, there's the City of Sault Ste. Marie official plan, as well as several identified conservation reserves throughout the study area. With respect to transportation, we have Highway 17, some airports, as well as the Canadian National Railway line, or the Algoma Central Railway. With respect to First Nations lands, there's no reserve lands that the study area goes through, but we do have protected Aboriginal and or treaty rights lands. For mineral resources, there's no impacts anticipated. However, there are several registered pits and quarries that operate within proximity to the project study area. Now we're going to get into the natural heritage features and areas. So like I said before, there's some designated areas. There's the Fort Creek Conservation Area and Montreal River Beach Ridges Conservation Reserve. Those are within section 1. There's the Googly Bay and Harmony Forest Conservation Reserve, which is they're both in section 3. And then there's the St. Mary's River Complex, which is over 16 kilometers from the southern portion of the project. We looked at the forest resource inventory mapping, so there's existing forestry and vegetation community mapping. And those polygons were field verified in September when the investigations were conducted. Through those investigations, a total of 112 plant species were observed within the project study area. So 95 of those were considered native and 17 or 15% were considered introduced species to Ontario, one of which was the highly invasive European common green grass, the Latin Phragmites australis, the species australis. Other significant observations included we saw some black ash, which is listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act, as well as the provincially rare oval bilberry. So some mitigation measures to help protect those natural heritage features. So the project will be establishing designated work areas, so the footprint is minimized as much as possible. And protective barriers will be installed around sensitive features where they're required. Sedimentation and erosion control measures will be implemented. For the existing poles that are currently within wetlands, access will be during frozen ground conditions or use swamp mats where appropriate. Restoration measures will be implemented where appropriate, as well as an invasive species management plan will be implemented to avoid the spread of invasive species following the cleaning equipment protocols. There's some significant wildlife habitat. So a herring gull nesting site and colony was identified on a rock island in Old Mill Bay of Lake Superior. That's north of the mouth of Sawmill Creek within Section 2. There's a moose aquatic feeding area along Quintet Creek and a sandhill crane nesting site. These were identified within Section 3. We also looked at, we had staff looking for nesting cavities for pileated woodpecker in the wood poles specifically, and none were found during the investigations. So with respect to watercourses, there are fish spawning and nursery habitat near Cranberry Creek and a tributary to Murphy Creek. The thermal regimes are cold water, and the records of both fall and spring spawning species. So the assumed in-water work timing window for all water bodies within the study area is from September 1st to June 15th. The project will be following mitigation measures for water resources specifically. In the event in-water works are required to support the construction of potential watercourse crossings, the necessary permits and approvals from MECP and DFO will be obtained prior to the commencement of work. And another example of mitigation measures, the storage of materials and refueling of vehicles will occur away from aquatic features. So these are some species at risk that have been identified for the study area. So in the top left, we have bank swallow. In the top right, there's the lake sturgeon. I really like that fish, looks like a dinosaur. Yeah. The bottom left, there's yellow brown myotis as well as northern. Those are the two bat species. In the middle, there's black ash. That's the tree there. And then in the bottom right, that's whippoorwills. That's a nocturnal bird species.
Yes.
So some example mitigation measures specifically for species at risk. So the project will be utilizing existing trails, access networks, and disturbed areas of the right-of-way to avoid the need for vegetation removal or trimming. And if there is any vegetation removal, it will be scheduled outside the overall bird nesting as well as the bat roosting seasons. And in addition to that, if there's any removal within 30 meters of a wetland, it will occur outside the overall reptile active season from April 1st to October 31st. A qualified individual will be hired to complete surveys as required, so that would be the nest surveys, area searches, and wildlife species relocations. And the construction would be and will be restricted to daylight hours except for in emergency circumstances. In addition to the aforementioned measures, there will be consultation with the MECP as well as DFO, the preparation of a mitigation plan, Species at risk training for all persons accessing the right of way will be completed. And any snags or cavity trees with the potential to support bats will be retained where feasible. Beyond the Class CA, Hydro One is implementing a biodiversity initiative. So this is a way for Hydro One to give back to the communities they serve. It allows engagement with communities to learn what is important to them and where Hydro One can make a difference. And as well as engage with communities to learn how we can enhance and restore the natural environment. So some of the examples that could be implemented with respect to this biodiversity initiative. So species could be planted that would contribute to nocturnal pollinator habitat, which would benefit species at risk bats and birds. So nocturnal pollinator species, there's some examples along the right-hand side of the slide here. Also, further invasive species management measures could be implemented. So managing the invasive species that occur within the right of way now, as well as some species at risk habitat enhancement. So actually creation of some species risk habitat and enhancement of existing habitat. Moving forward, Hydro One will work with communities to establish and implement a program that enhances the areas that are important to them. So next steps, the next steps are we'll receive input from this community information session and an ongoing consultation. And with the information we obtained from those and the questions we received from those, we'll finalize the ESR and file it with NCP. And the ESR would then be used to inform the construction activities with follow-up with the communities and regarding the biodiversity initiative. That's it. If you have any questions, I know this is a recording. You're welcome to email Sarah Cole and Christina Reynolds. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thank you.
That's good. Stop the report.
Yeah.